Welcome to the Healing Meows audio story channel. I hope you're having a calm and peaceful day. Now, let's begin today's story. I used to believe marriage only required two things. No betrayal. No abandonment. I didn't need romance. I didn't crave grand gestures or poetic promises. I didn't care about anniversaries or flowers or dramatic declarations of love. I just wanted peace. But it took me years, and a divorce, to understand something no one ever warns you about. There are marriages with no cheating, no violence, no screaming matches, and yet, they still destroy you. Quietly, slowly, piece by piece. They kill you with silence. With the phrase, "it's for the family." And with the systematic erasure of a woman's voice. I got married when I was 29. At that point in my life, I wasn't naive or reckless. I had a stable career, a solid income, and something many women my age still didn't have, a home in my own name. The apartment wasn't luxurious, but it was mine. I chose every tile myself, every curtain, every light fixture. It was the physical proof of nearly a decade of hard work, overtime, missed vacations, and quiet perseverance. I never imagined that one day, that very home would feel like enemy territory. My husband's name was Jong Jianwen. He was gentle, soft-spoken, conflict-averse. When we were dating, I thought those were virtues. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't express emotions dramatically. I mistook emotional absence for emotional stability. Only later did I realize, it was simply how he avoided responsibility. Jianwen wasn't cruel. But he wasn't brave either. He had mastered the art of standing still while everyone else collided. We got married after nearly 2 years together. The wedding was small. Nothing extravagant. Everything was reasonable. My mother-in-law was polite back then. Soft voice. Warm smile. She praised my education, my career, my manners. I believed her. I believed the version of people they show you when they still need your cooperation. After the wedding, Jianwen and I lived in my apartment. No one objected. No one commented. I thought I had won the lottery. 3 months later, I got pregnant. When the pregnancy test showed 2 lines, I sat on the bathroom floor for a long time. Not because I was scared, but because I understood, instinctively, that my life would never fully belong to me again. Jianwen was happy. Restrained, but happy. That same night, he called his mother. 2 days later, she came to visit. She brought supplements, home-cooked food, maternity clothes. She held my hand and said, gently, "This is your first pregnancy. Let me stay with you for a while. It'll be safer." Her tone was soft. Her reasoning flawless. There was no graceful way to refuse. I glanced at Jianwen. He said nothing. So I nodded. Not because I needed help, but because I didn't want to be labeled difficult so early into the marriage. That was my first real mistake. At first, things seemed fine. She woke up early to cook. The house was tidy. The atmosphere appeared harmonious. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. Shoes shouldn't be placed like that. It's dangerous. Pregnant women shouldn't eat spicy food. When I was pregnant, I never rested this much. At first, I smiled and let it go. I told myself it was just generational difference. Then the comments became more frequent, more detailed, more judgmental. The way I sat, the way I walked, the way I breathed. Everything became observable. Everything became correctable. Slowly, I realized something terrifying. I no longer had authority in my own home. The apartment I bought with my own money, the space I once felt safest in, now felt like a monitored environment. Whenever I felt uncomfortable and tried to speak up, Jianwen repeated the same sentence. "Just endure it a little. My mom is old. She means well." That sentence became a lid pressed over my mouth. Soft, polite, suffocating. I started questioning myself. Am I being too sensitive? Am I overreacting? Is this just what marriage looks like? And so, I stayed silent. I didn't realize that my silence was teaching them something dangerous. That my boundaries were optional. That my comfort was negotiable. That I could be overridden, without consequences. That was before my daughter was born. Before the disappointment in my mother-in-law's eyes. Before my postpartum collapse. Before I learned what it truly meant to be erased inside a marriage. The months I learned that silence can be violence. I gave birth on a rainy morning in early October. Labor lasted 14 hours. By the time my daughter cried for the first time, my body felt hollowed out, like something essential had been scooped away and not yet replaced. When the nurse placed her on my chest, she was warm and impossibly light. Her fingers curled instinctively around mine. In that moment, everything else faded. Pain. Fear. Even the quiet dread that had been growing inside me for months. I remember thinking, if I can protect you, then everything else is bearable. My mother-in-law arrived at the hospital less than an hour later. She stood at the foot of the bed, peering at the baby with an expression I couldn't immediately name. Not joy. Not disappointment either. Something more restrained. She's small, she said finally. The nurse smiled politely and said that newborn girls often were. My mother-in-law nodded, but her eyes had already moved past the baby, scanning the room, as if looking for something missing. No one said the word daughter out loud. No one congratulated me. When Keen Van returned from filling out paperwork, she pulled him aside and whispered something I couldn't hear. He came back quieter than before. After we were discharged, we returned to the apartment, the one that no longer felt like mine. The first week passed in a blur of feedings, crying, and physical pain I hadn't known to anticipate. My stitches hurt. My back ached constantly. I slept in fragments of 20 or 30 minutes at a time. I cried often. Sometimes without knowing why. Every book I had read warned about postpartum emotions, but nothing prepared me for how alone I would feel while surrounded by people. My mother-in-law took over the house with quiet efficiency. She reorganized the kitchen, moved things without asking, replaced my routines with hers. Whenever I tried to say something, she smiled and said, "I'm just helping, you should focus on the baby." But the help came with commentary. "You're holding her wrong. She's crying because you didn't listen to me. If you keep eating like this, your milk won't be good." Each sentence landed softly. None of them sounded cruel on their own. Together, they formed a constant hum of disapproval. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after the birth, I broke down. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours total the night before. The baby wouldn't latch properly. My chest hurt. My head felt heavy, like it was filled with wet sand. I sat on the edge of the bed and cried. Not quietly. Not politely. I cried the way people cry when something inside them is tearing. My mother-in-law stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "What are you crying for?" she asked. "Women have been giving birth for thousands of years." I tried to explain. The exhaustion. The pain. The fear that I was failing my child. She sighed. "You're too sensitive, that's the problem." Then she added, almost as an afterthought, "If you were stronger, maybe next time you could give us a son." I froze. I looked at my daughter, asleep in her crib, her tiny chest rising and falling. I felt something inside me crack. That night, I told Keen Van what his mother had said. He listened quietly, eyes on his phone. After a long pause, he said, "She didn't mean it that way." I stared at him. "What way did she mean it then?" "She's from an older generation," he replied. "She worries about the family line. You shouldn't take it personally." That was the first time I realized something important. He wasn't misunderstanding me. He was choosing not to understand. The weeks that followed blurred together. My body healed slowly. My mind did not. I felt constantly watched. Judged. Even my moments alone with my daughter weren't truly private. My mother-in-law hovered nearby, correcting, instructing, observing. Once, I sang softly to my daughter while rocking her. My mother-in-law frowned. "Why sing so much? She'll get spoiled." I stopped. Another time, I picked my daughter up when she cried. "She'll become dependent," my mother-in-law said sharply. I hesitated, then put my daughter back down. That night, I cried silently into my pillow, ashamed of myself. The apartment cameras had been installed months earlier, supposedly for security. At first, I didn't think much of them. Until one afternoon, my father-in-law mentioned something casually. "She cries less when you hold her like this," he said, demonstrating a position. I hadn't shown him that. Later, I realized. He had been watching the footage. The realization made my skin crawl. I told Keen Van. He frowned briefly. Then said, "They're just concerned. It's not a big deal." I began to feel unsafe in ways I couldn't explain. Then came the dinner. The one that changed everything. My mother-in-law announced that a distant relative, Aunt Jong, had come to the city looking for work. She insisted we invite her out to be proper. I agreed, thinking it would be a simple meal. I was wrong. Halfway through dinner, my mother-in-law began to cry. Loudly. She accused me of being cold. Of manipulating her son. Of planning everything from the start. She spoke as if I weren't sitting right there. People at nearby tables stared. I looked at Keen Van. He said nothing. I felt something detach inside me. Aunt Jong was the only one who touched my arm. Later, in the bathroom, she looked me in the eye and said quietly, "If you don't become strong, they will keep pressing you." That sentence stayed with me. That night, back at home, my mother-in-law finally said it outright. "We need another child." She spoke calmly. Reasonably. She talked about policies. About the future. About what if something happens. I listened, holding my daughter. Then I asked, "Are you hoping something happens to my child?" The room went silent. She accused me of overreacting. Then she stopped pretending. She wanted a grandson. She said a woman who couldn't produce a son was incomplete. Keen Van tried to pull her away, not to protect me, but to quiet her. That was the moment I stopped hoping. That night, after everyone went to bed, I stood in the living room, holding my sleeping daughter. I looked around the apartment. My apartment. And I understood something with terrifying clarity. If I stayed silent, this would be my daughter's future too. The moment I stopped shrinking. By the time my daughter was 3 months old, I had learned a dangerous skill. I learned how to disappear while still being physically present. I could hold my baby, smile politely, nod at criticism, and swallow every instinct screaming inside me, all without anyone noticing I was breaking apart. On the outside, I looked like a woman adjusting to motherhood. On the inside, I was constantly bracing for impact. My mother-in-law no longer pretended her comments were advice. They were instructions. She decided when my daughter should sleep, what she should wear, how long I was allowed to rest, how often I was being lazy. If I disagreed, she didn't argue. She sighed. She shook her head. She told me stories about real women she knew, women who gave birth in the fields, who never complained, who raised sons while carrying water on their backs. Every story had the same ending. "You are not enough." I tried talking to Jianwen. At first gently. "I feel like your mom doesn't respect me." He didn't look up from his phone. "She's just old-fashioned." Then more directly. "She criticizes everything I do. She doesn't mean it that way." Then one night, exhausted and shaking, I said, "I feel like I don't exist in this house." He sighed, annoyed, not concerned. "What do you want me to do? She's my mother." That was the moment something inside me cracked. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a quiet, internal realization. I was alone. The worst part wasn't the criticism. It was the rewriting of reality. If my daughter cried, it was because I didn't know how to soothe her. If she slept well, it was because her grandmother had fixed my mistakes. If I looked tired, I was weak. If I tried to rest, I was selfish. And Jianwen? He became invisible. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't aggressive. He simply wasn't there, emotionally, morally, or mentally. Whenever tension rose, he retreated behind his favorite sentence. "Let's not fight." But what he really meant was, "Let's not make things uncomfortable for me." The gender disappointment grew harder to ignore. My mother-in-law started buying boys' clothes by accident. She joked about trying again next year. She spoke about grandchildren as if my daughter were a placeholder. One afternoon, she said casually, "A girl can't carry the family line anyway." I froze. My daughter was sleeping in my arms. I felt her warm breath against my chest. I looked at this tiny human I had created, protected, and nearly destroyed myself for, and realized something terrifying. If I stayed silent, this would be her world. The breaking point didn't come from a scream. It came from a dinner invitation. My mother-in-law announced that a distant relative, Aunt Zhang, had arrived in the city looking for work. "She's family," she said. "We should treat her properly." Dinner was arranged at a crowded restaurant. From the moment we sat down, something felt off. My mother-in-law was tense. Performative. Waiting. Halfway through the meal, she started crying. Right there at the table. Loud enough for other diners to stare. She accused me of being cold. Manipulative. Ungrateful. She said I had trapped her son with my money. That I looked down on his family. That I planned everything from the beginning. Jianwen stared at the table. Didn't stop her. Didn't defend me. Didn't even look at me. I felt my chest tighten. Not with anger. With clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a performance, and I was the villain she had rehearsed for years. Aunt Zhang watched silently. After the dinner, while Jianwen walked ahead with his mother, she slowed her steps to walk beside me. She didn't criticize. She didn't console. She just said quietly, "If you don't become stronger, they will keep crushing you." That sentence followed me home. It echoed in my head while I bathed my daughter. While I lay awake at night. While I stared at the ceiling and realized I had been shrinking myself inch by inch, hoping it would make things easier. It hadn't. It had only taught them how far they could go. That night, my mother-in-law finally said it out loud. She didn't shout. She didn't whisper. She spoke with the confidence of someone who had never been challenged. "You should have another child." She talked about age. About policy. About insurance. She never said the word son. She didn't need to. I asked her calmly, "What happens if something happens to my daughter?" The room went silent. She laughed nervously. "Why would you say something like that?" I looked her straight in the eye. "Because that's what you're implying." She dropped the mask. She said women who couldn't give birth to sons were useless. She said my independence came from scheming. She said my success made men uncomfortable. Jianwen grabbed her arm, not to protect me, but to quiet her. He whispered, "People can hear." And in that moment, I knew. This marriage was already over. I stood up. My hands were steady. My voice was calm. "My daughter will take my last name," I said. "And you can pack your things and leave my house." They laughed. Until I showed them the documents. The apartment deed. The purchase date, years before the marriage. No shared ownership. No leverage. No illusion. My mother-in-law screamed. Threatened lawsuits. Called relatives. Cursed me. Jianwen just stared. As if he had only just realized I wasn't bluffing. That night, I filed for divorce. The begging came later. The apologies. The promises. Jianwen came home drunk one night, crying, holding my hands. I didn't know it was this bad. "I can change. I'll keep them away." I asked him one question. "Have you ever chosen me?" He couldn't answer. So I gave him mine. By the time I decided to end my marriage, there was no dramatic explosion. No screaming. No shattered plates. No doors slammed in rage. Just a quiet, terrifying clarity. I realized that if I stayed, I would disappear, slowly, politely, and completely. The night everything broke open didn't look like a breaking point at all. We were sitting at the dining table. The baby monitor hummed softly beside my plate. The soup was already cold. My mother-in-law spoke in the same gentle tone she always used when she wanted something. She didn't say, "I want a grandson." She didn't need to. Instead, she talked about the future. About insurance. About what if something happens. About how a family feels more complete with both. Her eyes never left my daughter's bedroom door. Every word was wrapped in concern. Every sentence framed as logic. And then she said it, casually, like an afterthought. "If the first child is a girl, it's better to try again sooner rather than later." Something inside me went completely still. I asked her, calmly, "What exactly are you afraid will happen to my daughter?" The room froze. She laughed nervously. Said I was sensitive. Said I misunderstood. But then, because people always reveal themselves eventually, she corrected herself. She said women who couldn't give birth to sons were unlucky. That families like ours were unstable. That my independence made me dangerous. I looked at my husband. He reached for her arm, not to stop her, but to quiet her. He was afraid the neighbors might hear. That was the moment I knew. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I said, "My daughter will take my last name. And you will leave my house." They stared at me like I had spoken another language. So I clarified. The apartment, mine. Purchased before marriage. Registered solely in my name. The money my husband contributed, voluntary. Not shared property. There was nothing to argue. My mother-in-law screamed. Threatened lawsuits. Called relatives. My husband said nothing. That silence was louder than anything she said. That night, after everyone left, I filed for divorce. I slept beside my daughter, listening to her breathe. And for the first time in years, I slept without fear. The next morning, my husband came back drunk. He cried. He begged. He apologized. He said he loved me. That he couldn't live without us. That he would change. I asked him one question. Can you name a single time you chose me when it mattered? He couldn't. So I showed him the security footage. The camera I installed after feeling watched for months. Footage of his father lingering in doorways. Watching. Lingering too long. Moments I had felt but couldn't explain. My husband sat on the floor and stared at the screen. Finally, he said, "I won't let them come anymore." And I realized something devastating. Even now. He thought the problem was them. Not him. The divorce was granted. There was no fight. Because there was nothing they could take from me. Afterward, his family trashed my name in group chats. They called me cold. Unfilial. Unnatural. I sent one message. A video. Then I left the group. No explanations. No defenses. Just truth. The threats stopped. Life didn't magically become easy after that. I was tired. I was scared. I was raising a child alone. But for the first time, every decision was mine. No one commented on how I fed my daughter. No one questioned my strength. No one tried to rewrite my worth. My home became quiet again. Not the suffocating silence of suppression, but the peaceful kind. Sometimes, people ask if I regret it. If I regret not enduring longer. If I regret breaking a family. I don't. Because what they call endurance was slowly erasing me. And what they call family required my silence as payment. Leaving wasn't failure. It was survival. I don't hate my ex-husband. I don't hate his parents. But I no longer make excuses for them. Because love that requires you to shrink is not love. And peace that depends on your silence is not peace. My daughter laughs loudly. She takes up space. She knows her name belongs to her. And every night, when I watch her sleep, I know I made the right choice. Some families are not meant to be preserved. Some homes must be left behind, so that life can begin. And sometimes, walking away is the bravest thing a woman will ever do.